Well, welcome to our sponsored research services Answer for You session. We're very glad that you joined us today. My co-presenter is Tammy Harden, Senior Proposal Administrator with Sponsored Research Services. And I'm David Hollingsworth, Director of Professional Development and Outreach for SRS. Today, our session is going to be on the NIH, National Institutes of Health. And it's just going to be an overview of that. If you're already familiar with it, maybe you'll pick up something new that you might learn, or if you're not too familiar with it, hopefully there'll be some things here that might help you if you're preparing a proposal to go into NIH. You know, NIH is the largest public funder of biomedical research in the world. It invests more than $43 billion each year for biomedical research, and its mission is to enhance health, lengthen the life, and reduce illness and disability. Just give you a little quick history on NIH. It traces their roots back to 1887 when they had created a one-room laboratory within this Marine Hospital Services. And the Marine Hospital Services was established to care for merchant seamen. And they had one person in the Treasury office that would collect 20 cents per month from each seaman to take care of any hospital costs that they might have at various contract hospitals. And then later, Congress gave the job for the MHS to check all the people that were coming into the country for any type of diseases, especially dreaded diseases like cholera and yellow fever. So that's where they got their start. And jump ahead to today, what a difference it looks like. This is their campus in Bethesda, Maryland. They've got more than 75 buildings on 300 acres there. And some of the research they actually perform on campus, but most of their research we're going to talk about is what they call extramural research. That's performed outside of their campus, where they contract that out to folks like us, universities and nonprofit research institutes and things like that. And it's basically conducted in every state and also around the world. So just talk a little bit about NIH and grants by the number. As I mentioned, more than 80% of their funding goes for extramural research. Typically, they fund more than 300,000 researchers at over 2,500 universities, medical schools, and other institutions. And extramural researchers, they submitted over 58,000 applications, so otherwise proposals to NIH. NIH ended up funding about around 11,000 of those. So that's roughly around a 20% funding success rate. So, you know, you can see that a lot of times it takes your researchers submitting quite a few proposals before maybe they're able to get one of those that are funded. The average award total was around $581,000. And as I mentioned, about 10% of their budget is for intramural research, and that's conducted by more than 6,000 scientists. These are the NIH employees that do it in their own laboratory, mainly at the campus that we just looked at. You might be interested about Texas A&M and how does NIH fit into our funding portfolio. Texas A&M SRS, we submitted about 563 proposals in FY21 to NIH. And we administered research expenditures in FY21 at over $321 million. So you can see that NIH is a very important part of our research portfolio here at Texas A&M and with our research agencies that SRS serves. This diagram just shows the various institutes and centers. They call them IC, institutes and centers. You can see like they have an office of the director, and that basically set the the policy and the planning for all of NIH. Each of these institutes and centers, they have their own sort of separate funding that is proposed through Congress. So each of them have their own budget that's set separately from the others. One of the things I'll point out, they have under the National Library of Medicine, it's on the bottom row there. That's the largest library for biomedical type of literature. And one of the things inside of that is called PubMed, and that's where they make the peer review articles available. So faculty that are getting NIH funding that are submitting articles and have them published, they have to make them available through PubMed so that everyone can have access to it. And another resource that is shown there, it says the Clinical Center. NIH has a thing that they call clinicaltrials.gov, and that's a registry where all or most clinical trials are entered in the information. And so it's a freely searchable type of site. So if somebody's looking for a clinical trial, they can go there. And currently they list over 424,000 studies with their locations in all 50 states. So a great resource there for somebody that's looking for clinical trial information. Just want to briefly touch base on this bar chart here. You can see all the centers that are listed going across there, all these 27 centers. And this will show you the projects that are funded by center, like the number. And so you can see one of the amber colored one there, it's the National Cancer Institute. And they fund a little bit over 10,000 projects. And some of the other ones that you can see, much smaller. Some of those are funding less than maybe 1,000 projects. So there's a wide variety in the amount of funding that goes to the various centers and the number of projects that they're able to support. So that's a good thing when you're looking for which center to submit your application to. Of course, it has to be a center that's funding those type of things, but you can get an idea of what type of funding that they have available. So again, kind of leading right into this, finding the right fit for your research, finding out where's the money, which centers, what's their missions and priorities. One of the best ways is just to go to their website and look at each center. Will go into detail about what their priority is and what they're interested in funding. So grantees ought to do their research on that. Contacting program officers. Sometimes maybe your research might sort of fall across one or more centers, and it may be very beneficial to contact your program officers, maybe multiple ones, and see which is the best fit for the type of research that you're interested in doing. NIH, they have a tool called Reporter, and you can go to their website and you can pull that up, and it allows you to do all kinds of searches in the NIH database for awards, find out for the type of awards or the type of research you're doing, who's making awards to that, what are the size of the awards. All types of information can be gained from that. And they've got one of the subsets of that is called Matchmaker. And so this is a tool you're able to put in information, and again, it's going to find the potential program officials or institutes or centers that would most closely be linked to the type of research that you're proposing. So take advantage of that. Go out, search their website, look at Reporter, and see some of the data that you can pull from that. I want to just mention about some of the types of funding. You can see they fund more than just research grants, but they at least have a little method to the madness of if you're looking up an award that you can find out what type of award it is. You can see the R series. Okay, that goes along with research. And the R01 is really the most widely used funding application that they have. It's basically what a investigator would submit to just to fund their a basic research type application. So the R01, like I said, is the most common. But you can see they also have career development awards. And so trying to help somebody move from beginning in their career to getting research. So they have various programs like that, transition programs like transitioning from a postdoc to a faculty member, researcher, those type of things. And then they have training and fellowships. They're the T and the F awards. And then also program center grants, cooperative agreements. And of course, the difference really between a cooperative agreement and a grant is that a cooperative agreement, typically you're going to have participation from the sponsor is going to be involved. And so those would be some where maybe the technical people at NIH are going to be more involved in the project than they would if you just are receiving or submitting for a grant. With NIH, they have standard due dates, and you can see here they are kind of spread throughout the year. Typically, like the R01s are occurring 3 times a year, February 5th, June 5th, and October 5th. So it gives you the opportunity, maybe you're not quite ready, you don't have all your data analysis or whatever prepared for this submission. So you don't have to wait a whole year. You just got a 3-month window to wait. And you can also see that they've got for renewals and resubmissions, they've got a separate set of dates 3 times a year for that. So just become familiar with whatever type of program that you're submitting to when it's available to make those submissions. And sometimes there'll be, of course, a specific request for applications, RFAs, and they may have other specified dates in those other than what these typical normal dates are. I want to mention 2 publications that NIH puts out that it's very good to become familiar with, especially if you're in the SRS, as far as if you're helping support the grants as a project administrator. One of them is called the Grants Policy Statement. And this is basically in a single document, has sort of the rules and the regulations and tells you how to administer an NIH funded grant. Another document is what they call the NIH Guide for Contracts and Grants. And whereas the grants policy statement will come out 1 time a year, they'll update that and publish that. It varies at kind of the time of the year now, but typically around maybe the 1st of the year. But this Guide for Grants and Contracts, that's published daily. And one easy way to kind of do a review of that is you can sign up and get a table of contents sent to you weekly. Typically that comes out on a Friday afternoon. And instead of like getting hit with a bunch of emails all during the week with updates, you can just get a summary there with links to the various updates. And one thing to remember, these guides are, like I say, are updated throughout the year. And so they're going to take precedence or supersede the information that's in the grants policy statement. And so you want to make sure, if you're looking for a particular policy, that you make sure that the Guide for Contracts and Grants doesn't have something that might override the policy statement. And then typically these updates are incorporated in the new edition of the grants policy statement when it's published each year. And also in the NIH Guide for Grants and Contracts, as it talks about there, are the funding opportunities. So you can see the various funding opportunities that are announced. Also, it will tell you which institute is participating in those funding opportunities. And as we talk here about funding opportunities, these are just some of the different types that they offer. They have what we call a request for application. As I mentioned, typically it's going to have just one receipt date, and it may have a specific amount of, like a cap on what you can submit to, or some other details. Program announcements. They have both solicited and unsolicited. They have what they call parent announcements. And one thing that you want to make sure of when you're reading through these announcements, does that particular institute that you're interested in submitting to, are they participating in this announcement? Because not all institutes participate in every announcement. Now, most of them all participate in what we mentioned, the most common one, the R01. But some of these others, you really need to look and make sure that they're participating, because you don't want to start preparing a proposal based on that announcement and then find out that your institute is not even accepting proposals with that announcement. NIH has a category that they call new, and also a category called early stage investigators. One of the things that they want to try to do is help the early stage investigators receive NIH awards. They know how competitive it is, and they don't want somebody to go by years and years without having the opportunity to get an award. So a new investigator is somebody, if they have not previously competed successfully as a PI on an independent award. So like an R01, once your PI has received an R01, they would no longer be considered a new investigator. An ESI is an investigator who's within 10 years of completing their terminal research degree. And so there is a place that's important when your investigator is setting up their profile and entering their information in e-commons, because there's a place that these different types can be checked off. And so they're going to pull that information from your e-commons profile. So it's important that you put in the correct dates and things like that as far as their terminal degree, because they're going to try to fund these type of folks at the same rate that they're funding their more seasoned researchers. So they're trying to give a leg up to these younger researchers that are coming in. So it's important to note that. All right. Now I'm going to turn it over to Tammy, and she's going to talk about the different systems for submitting, and some of the more details about the proposals that go in, the items that go into proposals. Go ahead, Tammy.
So NIH requires two systems to work together in order to submit your proposal. While you will search for opportunities through grants.gov, ERA Commons retrieves the application from grants.gov and compiles it into a consistent application format, and then makes it available to applicants and NIH staff for electronic research administration purposes. Following submission, ERA Commons becomes the primary site for accessing grant information, such as institute or center assignments, review outcomes, summary statements, and notices of award. ERA Commons also provides electronic business processes such as internet-assisted review, submission of just-in-time material, electronic SNAP progress reports, and financial reports, notification of extensions without funds, and also closeout documents. SRS has a process of submitting applications to NIH. As most of you know, we use CAIUS, which is a system-to-system program that submits to grants.gov. The process that we follow, other members of the university don't have Maestro or CAIUS probably will still use the grants.gov or Assist. But what we do is CAIUS is accessed through Maestro, and there's a link that you have in your work list, and the All PIs have access to that, and then we submit the application straight through there. There are advantages to using Cayuse. There's continuous error checking. So if you've ever noticed at the bottom, if you're looking at your application, it'll tell you, 3 errors or 1 error, 2 warnings. And then there's also the ability for more than one person to work in the application. ERA Commons has the following application submission. It becomes the primary site for accessing grant information such as Institute Center assignments, review outcomes, summary statements, and notices of award. Commons also provides electronic business processes such as internet-assisted review, submission of just-in-time material, as we've mentioned, progress reports, financial reports, notification of extensions, and closeout documents. NIH also has budget-related policies that we're going to discuss in the next couple of slides. And one of the budgets that we use is a modular budget format. Modular budgets are prepared when the FOA requires it or when the application meets all of the following requirements, which it must be an R01, R03, R15, R21, and an R34, or their cooperative agreement equivalent. And requests can be for no more than $250,000 in direct cost, excluding IDC in any budget period. And it cannot propose the use of human fetal tissue from elective abortions, and it cannot be from a foreign organization. NIH uses a modular budget format to request, again, up to a total of $250,000 in direct costs per year. And those are in increments of $25,000 for some applications rather than requiring a full detailed budget. Now, SRS does have a budget template created for modular budgets, and the internal budget includes personnel costs, equipment, supplies, graduate student tuition, etc. for every year funds are requested. Other budget items that calculate IDC, such as supplies, are lumped together. NIH will not ask for these details. They are important for you to have on hand when calculating your F&A cost base and writing your justification, and also for audit purposes. In order to determine how many modules or increments you should request, you would reduce your direct cost, your IDC from the direct cost, and then round to the nearest $25,000 increment. A modular budget justification should include just your personnel justification, and that would include the personnel, their names, if named, or of course to be named if they're not named yet, their role, their number of person months. You would not include salary or fringe, but you do need to remember that even if you're using a modular budget, the NIH salary cap still applies. When preparing a modular budget, you are instructed to use the current cap. As of right now, as of January 2nd, I believe the salary cap is $203,700, and that will probably, of course, change again this next January. For your consortium justification, which is if you have a sub, the same rules apply. You're going to include total cost, direct plus F&A, rounded to the nearest $1,000 for each consortium subcontract. Any personnel should include their roles and person months. If the consortium is foreign, that should also be stated. If an additional narrative is required, that would include explanations for variations in the number of modules requested each year. It would also describe any direct costs that were excluded from total direct costs, such as equipment or tuition. Any work being conducted off-site, especially if it involves a foreign study site or an off-site F&A rate. Any applicant that is requesting $500,000 or more in direct cost per year, excluding your IDC, must seek prior PO approval at least 6 weeks before the submission due date. If staff is contacted less than 6 weeks before the submission, there may be insufficient time to make a determination about assignment. So it's always best if you're going to know that you're going to request more than $500,000 in any year in direct costs, that you go ahead and reach out to your program officer in advance. This policy does not apply to applications submitted in response to RFAs or to other announcements that include specific budgetary limits. And additionally, the PI must include a cover letter with the application identifying the PO that was contacted and the institute or center that has agreed to accept the assignment of the application. CSR will accept such applications for review only if an institute or center has agreed to accept the application for consideration and the applicant submits with its application a cover letter to that effect. On the direct cost, if you plan on keeping it under the 500,000, kind of the key number that we look at is $499, $999, and 49 cents. And most people will keep it at $499,999 or a little bit less than that. For consortium indirect costs, for FOAs that include a direct cost limit, NIH policy excludes the consortium F&A when determining if an applicant is in compliance with the direct cost limitation. This policy impacts eligibility to submit a modular budget. So the modular budget format is used for applications requesting $250,000 or less in direct costs per year. Your consortium F&A costs are not factored into this direct cost limit. However, they may be requested in addition to the $250,000. We also, our budget template accounts for your subs IDC. So if you'll notice at the bottom, there's an additional box and it's noted that it's for NIH factoring. Since 1990, Congress has legislatively mandated a salary cap for individuals under NIH grants and cooperative agreements. The salary cap is tied to executive level 2 of the federal executive pay schedule. As of January 2nd, again, that amount is $203,700. The salary limitation applies to an individual's direct or institutional base salary and does not include fringe benefits or facilities and administrative costs. The fringe benefits are calculated based on the allowable salary as well as the indirect cost, and your institution may pay you beyond the cap with non-federal funds. Graduate student compensation. In 2001, the National Institutes of Health issued an NOT regarding graduate student compensation, which revised their policy on graduate student funds, supported funds from NIH grants and cooperative agreements. The revised policy was issued to address findings in 1994 by the Department of Health and Human Services Inspector General that 3 of 4 universities reviewed were using federal research grants to compensate graduate students at rates above amounts paid to first-year postdoc employees performing comparable work. Since postdoc employees are considered to have more experience and training than comparable graduate students in the study, the excess compensation was considered unreasonable. NIH sets the 0-level postdoc NRSA stipend as a useful benchmark for an award amount that approximates a reasonable rate of compensation for graduate students. NIH defines graduate student compensation as salary or wages, fringe benefits, and tuition remission. NIH does allow PIs to rebudget project funds to charge more than the awarded amount for GRA compensation if that compensation can be justified and is reasonable. There are different parts to your proposal. We will look at some of those common proposal components for an R01 application in the next few slides. Remember, the actual requirements may vary according to the activity code and the specific opportunity you're applying under. The title should be short and descriptive of the proposed research. Maximum space limit is usually around 81 characters, including spaces. The abstract should be a self-contained description of the project. It should contain information about the significance, broad objectives, hypotheses, specific aims, and methods to be employed. There should be a statement of how the project relates to the mission of the institute or center. The abstract should use lay language as much as possible. Assume that all reviewers, not just those assigned to your application, will read the abstract. Do not include proprietary or sensitive information, as the abstract will become publicly available if the grant is funded. Avoid describing past accomplishments and the use of first person. And I'll just add that when you when we submit your proposal for QC, that is one of the common issues that they find, is that the abstracts are not written, or that they are written in first person. So that's always something good to keep in mind. And you're going to want to write the abstract last so that it reflects the entire application. The relevance narrative, using no more than 2 or 3 sentences, describe the relevance of this research to public health. In this section, be succinct and use plain language that can be understood by general or, again, lay audience. Your facilities and other resources, this section provides information to indicate the environment can support your proposed research. Reviewers use this information to assess the capability of organizational resources to perform the proposed research. Resources may include laboratories, animal facilities, computers, offices, clinical or other facilities, and you're going to want to provide as much information on the capacities and capabilities, relative proximity, and the extent of availability of resources to the project. NIH requires submission of a biographical sketch, and as you know, we typically send you the most current updated template that we have. For each proposed senior key personnel and other significant contributors, NIH staff and peer reviewers utilize the biosketch to ensure that individuals included on the applications are equipped with the skills and knowledge and the resources necessary to carry out the proposed research. The Science Experts Network Curriculum Vitae, ScienV, supports the biosketch format, and NIH encourages applicants to use this to generate their biosketch. Your personnel statement, you're going to want to briefly describe why you are well suited for your role on the project. Relevant factors may include aspects of your training, previous experimental work on specific topics or related topics, your technical expertise, your collaborators or scientific environment, and your past performance in this or related fields, including ongoing and completed research projects from the past 3 years that you want to draw attention to, previously known as research support. Positions and scientific appointments and honors, you're going to run, this is something new this year, you're going to want to list those in reverse chronological order. All positions and scientific appointments, both domestic and foreign, including affiliations with foreign entities or governments. This includes titled academic, professional, or institutional appointments, whether or not remuneration is received. Your bibliography and references cited is the next piece that you're going to want to include. You'll provide a list of references cited in the project narrative and any other parts of your application. This section shows your breadth of knowledge in your field. There's no page limit for this section. Your appendix should be included only if allowed by the FOA. A maximum of 10 PDF attachments is allowed in the appendix. Publications are no longer allowed as appendix materials, except if the manuscript is accepted for publication but not yet published, or if the journal link is not available. Not all grant mechanisms allow publications to be included in the appendix. When allowed, there is a limit of 3 publications that are not publicly available. Your resource sharing plan will include findings with the wider scientific community, including, if applicable, a strong proposal is driven by a strong hypothesis. So your specific aims should encapsulate these concepts. It typically begins with a brief narrative paragraph or 2 that concisely states the issue or problem to be addressed, describes the long-term goals or objectives of the project, and clearly states your hypothesis to be tested. This is followed by a numbered list of the specific aims. The aims test different aspects of the hypotheses, operationalize the objectives, and provide a rationale for the experimental approach to be described later. For clarity, each aim should consist of only 1 sentence. Use a brief paragraph under each aim if detail is needed. More successful applications have 2 to 4 specific aims. And make sure your aims are logical, achievable, and clearly relate back to the hypothesis. This section is limited to 1 page. It is by far the most important page of the application. Many applications are won or lost depending on how precisely stated and how compelling the hypothesis and specific aims are presented. Your research strategy is organized into 3 sections: significance, innovation, and approach. The assessment of this research plan will largely determine whether or not the application is favorably recommended for funding. For an application with multiple specific aims, the applicant may address significance, innovation, and approach for each specific aim individually, or address significance, innovation, and approach for all of the specific aims collectively. You'll note that the R01 application allows for a maximum of 12 pages, which include the 3 strategy components, the significance, innovation, and approach. Images, graphs, and charts should be included with this section, not in a separate attachment. The significance in this section, you're going to state the research problem, the current state of knowledge, and potential contributions of the research to the field. Explain the importance of the problem or critical barrier to progress in the field that the proposed project addresses. Explain how the proposed project will improve scientific knowledge, technical capability, and/or clinical practice in one of the broad fields. Describe how concepts, methods, technologies, treatment services, or preventative interventions that drive this field will be changed if the proposed aims are achieved. Innovation, in this section, you're going to explain how the application challenges and seeks to shift current research or clinical practice paradigms. Describe any novel theoretical concepts, approaches, or methodologies, instrumentation, or interventions to be developed or used, and any advantage over existing methodologies, instrumentation, or interventions. Explain any refinements, improvements, or new applications of theoretical concepts, approaches, or methodologies, instrumentation, or interventions. And so the approach section, in this section, you're going to describe the overall strategy, methodology, and analyses to be used to accomplish the specific aims of the project. Describe how you plan to carry out the research. You're going to include details related to that specific methodology and explain why the proposed methods are the best to accomplish study goals. You're going to describe any novel concepts, approaches, tools, or techniques. Your research methods should relate directly to the specific aims. This section is very critical for demonstrating that you have developed a clear, organized, and thoughtful study design that tests the central hypothesis. State how the data will be collected, how it's going to be analyzed and interpreted, and you'll want to describe statistical techniques that will be used. Effective January 25th of this coming year, NIH will require researchers to submit a data management and sharing plan. This policy applies to all research funded or conducted in whole or in part by NIH that results in the generation of scientific data. The new Form H package, application package will contain the new NIH Form H grant application forms will have other plans attachments filled, and the plan will be 2 pages or less. And again, this is effective January 25th, coming up in the next few months. The NIH data sharing webpage address listed on this slide provides helpful information on the new requirements. And you can check Institute Center for the specified data repositories. There are 3 stages in the life of a data management plan: the submission, plan assessment, and the plan compliance. Submitting the plan is part of the application. The plan assessment will be made by the proposal reviewers and NIH staff, and then plan compliance continues through the life of the project. The plan is incorporated into the award term and conditions and is monitored at a regular reporting interval. So how does your grant get funded? The Center for Scientific Review primary role is to handle the receipt and review of the grant applications that NIH receives. NIH separates and reviews the process from funding decisions. Thus, they handle review of applications but do not fund applications. When applications are received, the CSR checks the application for completeness and assigns them to a study section for review and assigns a funding institute, such as the National Institute of Mental Health. That may be interested in funding the application if positively reviewed. A scientific review officer, SRO, at CSR handles the review of the application within a study section. And then we move each opportunity specifies all of the review criteria and considerations that will be used in the evaluation of applications. The request for applications and certain program announcements may include additional review criteria as well. And the overall impact, reviewers will provide an overall impact score to reflect the assessment of the likelihood for the project to exert a sustained, powerful influence on the research fields involved, in consideration of the following review criteria and additional review criteria as applicable for the proposed project. NIH utilizes a 9-point rating scale, with 1 being exceptional and 9 being poor. For all applications. The same scale is used for overall impact scores and for criterion scores. And before the SRG meet, each reviewer assigned to an application gives a separate score for each of the 5 review criteria.
And so I'm going to talk a little bit about what happens after the proposal submission. NIH has a process they call just-in-time, JIT. If you get notified that they want you to submit some of these documents for JIT, that's a good thing, because it means that they're not promising that your award's going to be awarded, but it's been reviewed favorably. And so typically, rather than requiring these documents at the proposal stage and requiring extra work, if it looks like it's going to be funded, that's when they contact you. The program manager will contact the PI and request these various documents. As it talks about here, there's various things. One will be like other support for all key personnel that are identified in the proposal. So you'll have to complete and submit that. Other things that they typically will require, if you're working with human subjects, they want to see that your IRB has reviewed it, your protocol, and given an approval for that, or the same thing if you're working with animals, that the IACUC has done an approval for that. If you're working with human subjects, they also want to make sure that you and the required staff on the project have completed their human subject education training. And so they're going to want to have you to submit your documentation that's showing that you've had that training. So let's just talk about other support and kind of what are some of the reasons why they request this. This is where you're listing your various other projects and how much time you have committed on those projects. Very similar to like with the National Science Foundation, they have the current and pending support. NIH just chooses to call it other support. They want to make sure that you have sufficient levels of effort that are committed to this project, but also make sure that you're not overcommitted, that you do have enough time available to commit to this project. They want to look at the other listing of the proposals or the projects that you have funded and make sure that there's not any scientific, budgetary, or commitment overlap. And as it talks about on the slide there, scientific overlap occurs when substantially the same research is proposed in more than one application. So they don't want to fund this application if you've already got it funded maybe by another entity or another group or the same group at NIH. Budgetary overlap occurs when items are requested but are already being provided by another source. So again, they don't want to be paying for something if it's already being provided maybe by your institution or somebody else. And then a commitment overlap occurs when an individual's time exceeds that 100%. So again, they're going to look at the commitment that you've already got for other projects. Just make sure that by adding this project, you're not exceeding that 100%, accounting for your teaching duties and other time requirements. If you do, they may come back to you and you have to work with them to see about maybe reducing time on some other projects or working out something so that you're not exceeding that 100% commitment. Note there's a new requirement now that went in for this last year for the PIs and other senior personnel when you're putting together this other support that you have to, as a PI or senior personnel, you have to personally sign and date the form. And you need to do that electronically. So like using the Adobe electronic signature is probably the suggested way to do that. And then these forms, as well as the other items under just in time, they're uploaded into the ERA Commons. And then once the PI uploads them, an AOR authorized representative of the institution, like the project administrator, will have to go in and review those and actually submit that to NIH through Commons. So that's that new requirement, like I said, as far as having that requirement to sign the form. So want to make sure that's done, or it'll be rejected if they're not signed. Again, just sort of the timing of it, as I mentioned, it's going to come about when the application is under consideration for funding. Other times that you have to submit other support is going to be when you're submitting your Research Performance Progress Report, RPPR. And so as you submit those, typically maybe an annual progress report, if there's been any change in your other support, that's when you're going to need to update that and resubmit that as well. So it's not only at the beginning of your project, but throughout the project life. And then if there's any specific change. And so if your organization somehow becomes aware that there's a change in the other support and the PI failed to include that in their updates to NIH, then the organization is now required to notify NIH of that, that it was PI failed to disclose it, and the organization is required to disclose that information to NIH as soon as it becomes known. Also, I'll just want to point out that NIH has a responsible conduct of research training requirement. It's not for all their awards now, as one might think, but it's for certain types of awards. As you can see there, we talked about the F, which is the fellowship, or the K awards, and then a couple of these others that are listed there, specific awards and training awards. So this requirement applies to, as it shows, trainees, fellows, students, and postdocs who work on those projects. Out of the VPR's office, there is a group that puts on responsible conduct of research training, and they do that generally throughout the year. There's a number of different topics that fall under that, and so they offer that. One of the requirements for NIH was that it had to also incorporate some face-to-face training, not just all like online. And so, Texas A&M's meets that requirement, includes that. There's been some changes due to COVID that they've allowed some different type of maybe participation via Zoom to count for that face-to-face. But there's some links there as far as going to some of the finding some of the training requirements. You've gotten that award and you've completed the first year, and you may be wondering, okay, how am I going to get the funds for the following years? Because basically most of their awards, even though they're multi-year awards, they're only funded 1 year at a time, one budget period, which is typically a 12-month period. Or the competitive segment can be 1 to 5 years, but the budget period is usually 1 year or less. So in order to get that other money for the next year, is part of the process is submitting your annual progress report, as we talked about, through ERA Commons. So it's very important to get your report and get it submitted on time, so that you'll have NIH will release that next increment of funding for you. Thank you for joining us today.